your destiny.
Do you remember Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith on PS2? Of course you do. It's a pretty stupid question. It's one of the largest multimedia franchises in the world and one of the most popular consoles ever sold, and also widely considered one of the best tie-in games from the Star Wars franchise. Anyway, if you were born in the mid to late 90s or the early 2000s, then you were the perfect age for Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, and so was I. I was born in 1998, so I was 7 when this movie came out, which is the perfect age for Star Wars, because let's be honest, Star Wars is a franchise that have some amazing movies, have some not so amazing movies, have some good TV shows, not so good TV shows. But what Star Wars gets right, regardless of the quality of the media, is they understand how to suck children in with all of this merchandise, toys, games. And I played a load of this game in my friend's house on the PS2, and I bought it on the DS, and I had a toy of General Grievous and his unicycle thing. It doesn't sound as badass when you call it a unicycle, but I guess it is a unicycle. It only has one wheel. I had Anakin's lightsaber. I even dressed up as Anakin. And a funny little story is that back when I got my Anakin costume, it only came with one glove, and me and my parents were trying to figure out where the other glove was. Turns out Anakin only wore one glove because he got his arm chopped off, and I was just dumb. But moving on, I was the right age to get sucked in by all this merchandise, and I really did. I loved the movie, but where my love for the majority of things grow is in games. Back in the summer of 2005, I would go down to my friend's house on my road. We'd close the curtains in the bedroom. We'd turn the PS2 fan. The fan would be loud. The console would be hot. It would be a scorching day, but we would still lock ourselves in the room and we'd play through this whole game in one day. Bonus missions, main story, we do some of the versus stuff, and I just have extremely nostalgic memories of playing this game. And in a day and age like today where everybody is arguing over this game, they don't like it, they don't like this, there's some controversy, I want this channel to focus on the more nostalgic side of things, go back to the roots of gaming and why we all love games. Now, at some point in these videos, I will have to take the nostalgia tinted glasses off and talk about the game itself, how it holds up, does it still play well, how does it look, things like that. So does Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith hold up? And also, will it hold a permanent place in my newfound collection on this channel? Let's find out. If you don't know, Revenge of the Sith is a character action beat 'em up style game, and it takes you through, obviously, the events of the whole Revenge of the Sith. Some levels you play as Anakin, other levels you play as Obi-Wan. And what this does is that it captures the movie. It gives you, just like the Lord of the Rings games, it gives you those scenes from the movie and then in the gameplay. Now, what this game is missing, even though it's a bit janky nowadays, is in the Lord of the Rings games, when the movie scene transfers from movie scene into gameplay, and it does it seamlessly. You know, obviously the graphics don't hold up, but it does it seamlessly. Here you just get the scene and then cut to a load screen and then you load into the game. But I was honestly surprised when I started up the first level, and I was surprised at two things. One, it's a pretty competent action game. Like, it has combos, you have loads of different enemies to fight, you have loads of different force powers to use, but this game is tough and is way harder than I remember being. Now, I do remember this game being hard. As I said, I'd go up to my friend's house and we try play it, and I remember the boss fights being quite difficult, specifically the General Grievous boss fight. And what I realised going into this now is that on the first level I died. And then I got sent back to the start and I was like, oh, so this is like a very traditional old school beat 'em up style game where you either have a set amount of lives, like in the DS version, or you only have one life and you just hope that you have a checkpoint. And most levels when you die, you get sent straight back to the start, which can be kind of frustrating in boss fights, but you know, it is a bit of an old school game, which is something that I'm going to have to mention in all of these videos. I will have to talk about the sort of, you know, those old school sensibilities that sometimes hold up, other times don't. I will have to mention them, but they won't really be detracting too much because I think that's just part of playing old games. It's just going to happen. Just like how playing this on a CRT looks amazing. That's part of playing an old game. But also the game is 50 Hz since I'm playing the European version. I don't know if the game runs at 25 FPS or 50 FPS, but it is generally a pretty smooth experience. But yeah, surprisingly, I died on the first level and then got sent back to the start. Health is pretty rare. You find back to tanks around the world. And I think that's going to be my first issue with the game. And this is in the DS version as well. The DS version is a more traditional 2D beat 'em up, but they're similar enough games in their style. You are pulling off combos, you are killing enemies. But how you find secrets in both games is really annoying. All the secrets and item drops are in random destructible items in the level. On the DS version, it's really bad because you literally see like a pillar that kind of just looks like something in the backdrop, and you break that, and sometimes it will drop health, other times it will drop XP orbs. But in the PS2 version, you will have like barrels and consoles you can break, and they hide collectibles and upgrades, which is something I don't really like because just going around smashing things, it just isn't fun. But apart from that, as a combat experience, it's honestly really solid. I was kind of surprised by it. When you go in, you have heavy, you have light attacks, you have circle, which is your finishing move, and then you also have force abilities. And this is one thing that I really want to hit on this game, is that both characters, Obi-Wan and Anakin, have completely different force abilities. They both have like a force push, but Anakin can use lightning, Obi-Wan can use Jedi mind tricks, and Anakin can, I think, use force choke as well. So what I want to go back to, as I said at the start of this video, is that Star Wars, if you are a kid that grows up in the era of that Star Wars coming out, they capture that feeling of your imagination and your creativity. Like, I remember being out my back garden. I had Anakin's lightsaber. I also had Luke's lightsaber from when I was really young. But I actually got quite good at flicking the lightsaber around and doing loads of tricks. And in my mind, I was Anakin, I was Luke, I was Yoda. And the best thing about this game is that I want to use that cliche line, it makes you feel like Spider-Man, it makes you feel like a Sith or a Jedi. But it really does. And when you're sitting there and you're playing as Obi-Wan or you're playing as Anakin and you're pulling off all these tricks, you're picking up a droid, you're throwing them at someone, you're slicing somebody up, it just captured that feeling all them years back where I was out my back garden imagining I was here and I was fighting all these droids. And then when you're done playing outside, you go inside, you turn the PS2 on, and then you can actually do the stuff that you were imagining. And that is what good licensed games do. They make you feel like whatever character you want to be. And then if you tie that into nostalgia, so that you have like that childlike wonder, as well as being able to feel like the character that you were playing as out your back garden, it's just like a match made in heaven, and it's probably the reason why I have such fond memories of both of these games. And then you get on to the boss fights. I remember this game being quite tough. I remember struggling a lot on the General Grievous fight. Eventually I beat him. We did beat the game multiple times. Now, I don't understand how back in the day I managed to beat this game. Because even today, eventually you learn, the tricks of how to fight certain bosses. But when I got into the Count Dooku fight, I got absolutely destroyed. And then you realize that there's, I think, 4 phases in the fight, and if you die on any phase, you get sent straight back to the start. And I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be a serious challenge. And what the Count Dooku fight really forces you to get good at is to learn how to do the parry mechanic, which is if you hold forward and L1, you go into a lightsaber, like, dual shunt, I believe is what it's called. Then you have to mash buttons to basically pull off an attack that will hit him. Now, this boss fight eventually I did. I think it took me maybe 30 minutes to beat him, so, 10 or 10 goals or whatever. So that was fine. And then the General Grievous fight, I tried to fight him like I fought Dooku, but then I realized that's not how you do it. You're actually supposed to not lock onto him and actually run away and wait for him to, like, end his combo and then go in and just get a little string of attacks in and then walk away. So each boss has their method that you have to kill them, and they do kind of force you to learn certain mechanics, but sometimes they feel a bit like bullcrap. Eventually, like when I was fighting Grievous and I was trying to block him, he would just get locked in doing constant strings of attacks and I couldn't get a hit in. I was like, oh, that's kind of a bit annoying, isn't it? And then when it comes to those lightsaber shunts, I think the game doesn't do a very good job at like telegraphing what you should do next. I could pretty consistently get into them, but then the majority of the time when you would attack them afterwards, they would dodge it and then it was just a waste of time. And I would press different button combinations after, and sometimes one button combination would work. I'd press triangle and circle together, or X and triangle, or square and triangle together, and they would sometimes attack them where the attack would go off, other times they dodged them. And I don't know if it's just luck or maybe I just couldn't, the game wasn't properly conveying to me what I was supposed to do. Eventually I got through them. But I think that's ultimately this game's biggest issue, is that it feels good to play, just good, where all the attacks just kind of feel like you're not really hitting anything. And I didn't really realize, I knew something was off about the combat when I was playing it, but I only started to realize what was really wrong with it when I started playing The Force Unleashed, which I only started playing today for the first time ever. And when I started playing The Force Unleashed, you could feel every hit. When your lightsaber made contact with an enemy, regardless of the enemy, the controller would vibrate. You get good visual and audio feedback on it. But here it's like you're almost hitting nothing. And then it's also kind of hard to know if your combo's going to come off. And it's also hard to know how to break guards and stuff like that. So it's that sort of stuff that the game doesn't teach. But I don't think the game is so difficult that it needs to be able to teach you those things. You can just brute force your way through and eventually you'll just figure out how to do things. But the part that I have the fondest memories of about this game are all the bonus content. So first of all, when you beat the story, spoiler alert, the final battle is Anakin versus Obi-Wan. In the base game you play as Obi-Wan, you kill Anakin. Kill Anakin. Spoiler alert for Star Wars if you're if you don't know what happens. But in this game, you can also do the final level as Anakin. And I just like the fact that they were allowed to have a bit of fun with it. They were allowed to, oh, let's just do this as a little fun thing. Let's kill Obi-Wan instead of killing Anakin. And I just like that back then games sort of had that fun where there was these alternate endings in games, it would specifically licensed games, or alternate costumes or cheat codes or stuff like that. Then you get on to my favorite content when I was younger, and they were all the bonus missions. So first of all, you unlock a versus mode, which I couldn't play because I don't have anyone to play with. You also get a cooperative mode, which again, I have very fond memories of playing both of them, but I couldn't play them because I had nobody to play them with. But what you do get are these bonus missions. And I just had a fucking amazing time when I was a kid playing these, because I know a lot of Star Wars fans hate this, and I know it's cool to hate on Star Wars. I'm not a Star Wars hater, okay? I'm a casual Star Wars fan that likes watching the movies, likes watching the games. I enjoy them for the spectacle of what they are, and then I just move on. I'm not a massive fan. I don't know the lore. But a lot of people hate flippy jumpy around Yoda. But as a kid, when I saw flippy jumpy around Yoda, I loved it. And that's the thing about Star Wars, as I was saying, it captures that thing when you are a child. It's like, oh my god, look at Darth Maul, look at this cool character, look at Anakin, look at Yoda. And they're just cool. And when I was a kid and I saw Yoda jumping around, I thought it was cool. And then they give you a bonus mission where you get to play as Yoda and you get to do all these flips and tricks and kill loads of people. I'm like, oh yes, this is what I want to do. But then it gets better because you get to play as one of General Grievous' bodyguard. And again, this is just cool. You could probably use the bodyguards in the versus mode, so it's not like they just developed a whole new character for this one mission. But I just find it so interesting that they decided to give you these levels where you got to play as characters that didn't show up anywhere else in the game. Like, you got to play as Yoda. You got to play as General Grievous. I know he was a character, so they've probably already developed all of his animations, and they have for a lot of these characters. But still, it's just cool that they give you that to play. And yeah, these missions just capture that childlike feeling that I will be going back to a lot on this channel, because that's what nostalgia is all about. And then, I don't really want to talk too much about this, but this is one of my favorite DS games of all time. It's my first ever DS game I had. I went on holidays to Orlando, and my parents would give me like a couple of $100 to spend. And knowing me, I would always spend them on games. That's the only thing I ever cared about. And we walked into GameStop, and I saw behind a glass case, there was a used, chunky, original DS. And I think it could have been $150 or $160 or something. And it came with a game. I think you could get one used game. And obviously, I saw Star Wars. I was like, I want Star Wars. Little did I know that I would actually be buying a very good game. Because, you know, back in the day, well, this is with licensed games, full stop. But especially back then. Back then, you would kind of be hit or miss whether or not the licensed game was good. You have really good licensed games like Cars. I had that on the PSP. I love that game. And then you have really bad licensed games that I'm struggling to think of one off the top of my head. But, you know, there's a lot of bad licensed games. And then I get Revenge of the Sith. I pop it into my DS. And I started playing it, and I was like, I love this game. This game is great. And even to this day, the game is still great. It's still a fantastic game. It's a very traditional 2D beat 'em up. It's tough. You have lives. If you die, you get sent back to the start of the level. You kind of have to know the enemy placements, how to like jump over their attacks. And it just looks gorgeous. Like, I'm going to put long play footage over this, but I don't know. It's just back then, you just get different games, even though they were named the same. It's a sort of character action game on the PS2. It's a more traditional 2D-ish beat 'em up on the DS. I think the GBA version is the same as the DS version. And there was just something so cool about that. The fact that I got both of the same games, both called Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, and they played so differently. And I just loved it for that. And I have very fond memories of both of these games. And I just had a great time playing both of them, especially the DS version. That leads us on to the question. Are these games going to stay permanently in my collection? Because that's a point of this Retrobution channel. I want to go back. I want to play old games. I bought a CRT, have a PS2. I have multiple PS2s. I have PS3s. I have PlayStation 1s. I have Wii. I have DS, everything. GBAs. I have a lot of old consoles. And yes, early PS3 is retro on my eyes. But that's another debate for another day. And I think Both of these games are going to stay permanently in my collection. And I don't want to have this collection where I'm just collecting for collection's sake. I want to just have a curated list of physical copies of games that I enjoy, that hold up today, and I have nostalgia for. Or even if I don't have nostalgia for, they are that good that when I play them for the first time nowadays, they just hold up. Just like, you know, imagine I played Resident Evil 4 for the first time on the Wii in like 2018. That game is still in my collection. It's a fantastic game. It's the best version of that game. And I think both Revenge of the Sith on PS2 and DS are going to stay in my collection. The DS version, I believe, is better. It just feels better. It looks better. It's more unique than Episode 3 on the PS2 because that just sort of feels like, you know, a very typical action game that was developed alongside a movie. You know, think of the Lord of the Rings games or something along them lines. This one feels very unique. I have a lot of memories of it and I just love it so much. It's such a fun game to play. It's tough. Both of them are tough. They will kick your ass and that's fine. Both of them are staying in my collection. And yeah, that's Revenge of the Sith on PS2 and DS. I really appreciate you watching the first video on Retribution. There will be loads more content this year covering all sorts of consoles, covering all sorts of games. I'll be doing compilation reviews. Like I want to do a video on light gun shooters on the PS2 and light gun shooters on the Wii. And then I want to do a lot of licensed games because that's where I spent a lot of my time playing games when I was young. And then we'll look at some games that I missed. I don't know. I can't think of a game off the top of my head. But there will be games that will be recommended by people in the comments. So if you enjoyed this, let me know what game you want me to cover next. Maybe a hidden gem on the PS2 or the Wii or the DS or the GBA or the PS1 or whatever. And I will try get around to it if it's possible for me to do it first of all, because some of these games are stupidly expensive. I know I can always emulate, but ideally I won't do that. But thank you everybody for watching.